Hello students, we're up to the part of this class where I'm going to start reviewing for the final exam, which will be approximately in 2 weeks. I'll give you more exact information next lesson, but I'm going to review from the link that I gave you where you could print out a sample final, which I'm showing you right here. If you haven't printed this out already, you could pause the video and do that first, please. And then you'll come back and I'll start doing the first 5 questions today. Okay, the first question, it says solve for x. Notice it's an inequality, which we had done in the past. So I'm going to do it right over here. Since it says solve, you have to do just like a regular equation and solve for x. Okay, so we're going to try to get the x by itself. We'll take away 7 on both sides. Okay, then we subtract. We get 24. You bring this down. Okay, the 7's of course cancel and you're left with negative 3x. Okay, now here comes the part where you have to remember a rule. You're dividing the inequality on both sides by negative 3. That's of course to get the negative 3's to cancel out. But remember the rule, when you divide an inequality by a negative, you change or reverse the sign. So instead of more than or equal, it's going to be less than or equal. Okay, and then you bring down the x. 24 divided by negative 3 is negative 8. And that's it, we're done. It said solve, we solved it. Okay, now the second question is a little harder. They're asking you to get the equation of a line. And in order to do that, you have to use the formula y equals mx plus b. Okay, I recommend doing it this way. I think it's the easiest way. Don't try to graph it. That'll drive you a little crazy doing that. Not only that, it's a much longer way and a much longer method. This way is easier. Now, as you recall, the m is the slope, and you always go for the slope first. Since the line we're going to find is perpendicular to this line, we need to find the slope of this line. Okay, and then I'll review the rule for perpendicular lines and slopes. We'll get to that in a second. But first, let's solve for y, because that's how you read the slope. You want it to look like this. Y equals a number, a x, and a number. So to solve for y, you get rid of the x. Okay, and then divide by 2. Okay, now to read the slope, we're going to break this up. 9 over 2. Take away. 6x divided by 2 is 3x. Okay, once you get y by itself, if you notice from the formula, the coefficient of the x, the m, is right here, right next to the x, so it's negative 3. But be careful, the slope we're about to use, which we're calling m, since it's perpendicular, you have to use the opposite reciprocal of this answer. So instead of negative 3, which is really negative 3 over 1, you're going to change the sign, and you're going to do the opposite fraction or reverse it. So instead of 3 over 1, it'll be 1 over 3. Okay, the sign was changed. Now remember, if they say parallel, that's different. If it says this word, then the slopes are the same. In this case, it says perpendicular, but if it said parallel, you would just use negative 3. Okay, one of those 2 types of questions will be on the final for sure, either perpendicular or using parallel, and you'll need to find the equation of the line. Okay, now that we got the slope, we're going to go to the formula, and we're going to substitute. We need a y and an x, and we just got the m. Notice that right over here is the x and the y. So we substitute y over here, negative 4. M is 1/3. We're going to multiply by x, which is 3, and then plus b. Now in this case, it's easy because the 3's cancel each other out, and you get 1 plus b equals negative 4. Take away 1 to solve for b. And you get b equals a like signs, you add and keep the sign. Okay, so now that we know what b is and we know what m is, we just have to write the answer. Our final answer is using this formula. It's y equals, you have to put the number for m, which is 1/3. So you get 1/3 x, and then b is -5. And that's a reminder, which I hope you'll practice, to get the equation of a line using either parallel or perpendicular. Okay? Now the third question is not hard, it's just slightly long because you have to multiply this and simplify. Sometimes they say combine like terms, or sometimes they say simplify. Either way, you're going to multiply and then make sure you simplify it. Now all we have to do is distribute the x. So x times x squared is x cubed. X times minus 4x is minus 4x squared. And x times plus 7 is plus 7x. Okay, then we distribute the plus 3. So we'll get plus 3x squared. Then the plus 3 and the minus 4x, you'll get minus 12x. And finally, plus 3 times plus 7 is plus 21. Okay, now we're not finished because they want us to simplify or combine like terms. So to do that, we'll notice there's a x3, there's only one. We'll write it down. I recommend just putting a light line so you won't look at it again. Then there's a minus 4x squared and a plus 3x squared. Those both have an x squared, so those are like terms. So you're doing minus 4 and plus 3, which is minus 1 x squared. The 1 is optional. You don't need that. So this one and this one are now done. So I put a line. Then you have plus 7x and a minus 12x. We have to subtract, getting 5x, and you keep the sign of the larger number. So now these two are done. And last but not least, we have a plus 21. Don't forget to write that in. And now that's done. Okay, so the final answer is all this. Okay, by the way, when you put this on the answer sheet that I'm going to provide you with, when you do the final, you could break it up. You could take the first two, put it a little above the line on the answer sheet, and then just below it, you could continue writing the rest. Minus 5x plus 21. So this would be another way you could write your answer on the final exam. There's another type of question that's asked on the final exam. Okay, I just want you to realize, by the way, that all the questions I'm doing here are similar, but definitely not the same as what you'll see on the final. So I would recommend that you practice these and also find others that are in your homework, in the class notes, in the textbook, and even online, and just practice a few more. Make sure you're comfortable doing this, and then you'll definitely be able to pass the final. Okay, question 4 is one of the harder questions. When I say harder, it's because a lot of students get this type of question wrong. So let me go through this carefully. These are two monomials that we have to simplify and multiply. And to do that, you got to make sure you use order of operations. Remember that parentheses and exponents come first. So we have to work on this, okay? And we're going to use a rule, a law that I'm going to write right here that I think you'll remember as soon as you see it. When you have a parentheses and an inner exponent and an outer exponent, you just multiply the exponents. And of course, copy the base. Okay, so using this law, we're going to do that right here. Now, this is how you should do it if you want to get this right. Take the -4 together. To keep it together, put a parentheses. That'll keep the negative and the 4 together. Okay, now the exponent would be understood to be a 1. When you use this rule, you're multiplying 1 times -3. That'll give you -3. So that would be the first base. The next base is a, copy it. -2 times -3 is +6. And then the next base is b. 3 times -3 is -9. So now this whole monomial has been simplified by doing the exponent and parentheses first. So we're going to multiply that in a minute, but first we have to apply it here because this also has a parentheses and an exponent, but this one's much easier. There's a 1 here, so you get 8. 1 times 2 is 2. Then there's a A. 1 times 2 is 2. Then there's a B. And again, 1 times 2 is 2. So you see this one was a lot easier. Okay, now we're getting somewhere, but we're not finished because we have to multiply this. Now remember I told you the tricky part here are the numbers, which I'm circling. So we're going to take these numbers and I'm going to do it on the side. That's what I recommend. This way you'll get it right. So -4 to the -3 multiplied by 8 squared. Okay, now you can work it out and you'll have space and you won't get it confused with the lettering. So here we have to get rid of the negative exponent, and there's another rule that you should know. It looks like this. Okay, that's another exponent law that you should definitely know. To get rid of the negative, you write 1 over the same thing without the negative. Okay, is that coming back to you? If not, you better study that. Make sure you know that. So going right here, this becomes 1 over the same thing, but without the negative. Okay, this one is easy. It's just 8 squared. 8 times 8 is 64. Okay, let's simplify the bottom and then we'll be able to work it out. This means -4 3 times. Okay, when there's an odd number, as I told you, you could just write a negative or you could just multiply. You'll get -1 over negative, and then 4 times 4 is 16, and 16 times 4 is 64. So we get 1 over -64 times 64. Okay, to finish it, think of this as being over 1, because 64 divided by 1 is 64. When you do that, the 64's cancel. Okay, now notice here, this is really a 1, because 64 into 64 goes 1. So you get -1 and a 1 on top. You don't need that. Or you could just say, unlike signs, you always get a negative. So it's -1. This would be a 1. And -1 times 1 is just -1. That's all you get there. So now let's finish the problem. We already did the numbers and we got -1. This would be a to the 6 times a squared. You add the exponents when the variables are when the bases are the same. So it's 6 plus 2. You get a to the 8. Now you got to be careful here. It's b to the -9 times b squared. You add the exponents. -9 plus 2. So you're doing this. -9 plus 2. That's -7. So you get b to the -7. Okay, now to make this completely correct, you have to get rid of any negatives in the exponents. The problems usually tell you, they'll say, simplify and use positive exponents. That's not a positive exponent. So you got to go back to the law that I explained over here, where you put it on the bottom and you change it from negative to positive. So that would just put the b -7 as b +7 on the bottom. So your final answer will be a negative, which you could put in the middle. A8 just stays where it is on the top. And the negative, using this rule, goes to the bottom. Okay, and that's your answer. I strongly suggest that you practice more of these. Remember, I gave you a bunch in class. You should have your notes. And of course, you have the textbook. I would practice more of these type of problems so you'll get used to it. Okay, the last one is probably one of the easiest questions. They want you to write this in scientific notation. So I'm going to, again, explain the rules of how you do it. You read this from left to right, and as soon as you pass a number that's not 0, in this case 4, you could put an arrow right after that number. Okay? So start reading left to right. As soon as you see a number not 0, put an arrow after it. Copy all the numbers starting from the first number you see. So it's 4. We need the 5, so we're going to put 0, 5. Where the arrow's pointing, you put a decimal. Scientific notation, you always times it by the same number. You remember that? Always by 10. Okay, and now you count from the arrow to the decimal that's in the problem. In this case, the decimal's over here. So you're counting this way, which is a negative direction. So we have to remember to use a negative. If the decimal was over here, you would count in the positive direction. So we're going negative. So let's count how many numbers we pass to get to the decimal. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, so that would be 9. Now be careful, that's not the answer. Remember I just said we're counting in the negative direction? So you must put a negative in this case. If you were counting this way to your right, that would be like going in the positive x direction, then you wouldn't need a negative. So let's say, for example, it was understood to be here and you went this way, 1, 2, 3, then it would be just a positive 3. You wouldn't need a negative. But in this case, you need it, and that would be your final answer. Okay, so you have all the answers. First one, second one, third one, fourth one, and of course the fifth one. Okay, now next lesson I'm going to review the next 5 questions on this sheet. So if you could do those for homework, that would be great. And then next time I'll be going over these. Okay? All right, take care, and I'll give you more information next time. I hope you get a lot out of this lesson. Bye for now.